الحمد لله وحده والصلاة والسلام على من لا نبي بعد نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اقتفى أثره واستنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد, then inshallah today we have in front of us a book from the more beneficial books in the al-I'tiqad, or the science of creed and belief, the science of what was classically known as a sunnah. The sunnah here referring to the way of the Prophet ﷺ in his belief system, or the field of Iman, or what was also known as the field of Tawheed. All of these names being synonyms for this science of what is the belief system of the Muslim. And in front of us today is a book from the more beneficial books in this science, the book entitled Sharh Usul I'tiqadi Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, the explanation of the fundamentals of the Aqidah of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, by Abul Qasim Hibatullah ibn al-Hasan al-Lalika'i rahimahullah ta'ala, who died in the year 418. This book is unique in the fact that it is one of the later books, therefore covering a large field of the issues of Aqidah. So as we mentioned, al-Lalika'i rahimahullah, he died in the year 418. And he covered in his book all of the innovation that existed from its inception up until his time. And he commented on it by bringing the statements of the Salaf in refutation to it. So every innovation, from the innovation of al-Khuruj wal-Khawarij, the innovation of the Khawarij, to the Shia, to the Jahmiyyah and the Rafida, to the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila, and everyone up until his time, all of the different innovations that sprouted amongst the Muslims up until his time, he covers it in an encyclopedic type fashion, meaning from beginning to end in chronological order. And that in itself isn't unique, but the fact of the matter that he did it with narrations, being from the later books, or the last generation of books that actually transmitted the information to us by way of narration, by way of chain. And in doing so, he preserved for us many of a book that outside of his collection was lost to us. So he preserved in his book many scholastical works, or many scholarly works by individuals who their actual manuscripts were lost to us, but he preserved them in his book. And statements and circumstances of individuals that we to this day haven't ceased benefiting from. And all of this, in spite of the fact that he died young, and he didn't have what we would consider a long life. And instead, as it relates to his biography, then very little is known about him. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted for him this level and this prestige, and so he granted his book acceptance in the earth until it became one of the more fundamental books that a Muslim is in need of and depends on. And obviously we won't go too much into his story or the background of the book. Inshallah, it will become clear through the reading of it and the translating of it. And obviously, the student, as it relates to any book, it's important that they read about the book and about the information that precedes the book in the dirasa, especially if you can find a dirasa of a book where someone studies the book and the author and presents that finding, or presents those findings in their introduction, to give you a clearer picture of the book and its background. When was it written? the agenda behind it, when was it completed, some of the events that surrounded its authoring, and likewise the life of the author, some of the circumstances that he found himself in when he died, etc. All of these things are usually found in the introduction of any good print of the book, and thus the manuscripts, what kind of condition were they in, whose hands did they pass throughout the generations, where can they be located. All of these things are things that you can usually find in the introduction of a good print of a book. And these are the qualities that separate a good print, right, a reliable print, from what they call a tabatu tijariyah, a commercial print, where a commercial print might not have a solid introduction, a solid studying of the book, no referencing of the manuscripts and things of this nature. And we only mention that because obviously this lesson or these translations are meant to bring us closer to the statement of the Salaf. And that requires narrating, that requires narration, that requires the chain. And the aspect of the chain that is still important today, because the chain still exists, although we don't use it as the source. We don't use it in its authenticity or its weakness in the grading of hadith. So my chain to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for the most part, is decoration. It's the adornment of the people of hadith in their jewelry, in their beautifying factors. That being the case, although the chain is not the basis that we rely upon today, what we do rely upon is the science of verification and authentication as it relates to manuscripts, as it relates to versions of the book. And so having this background information and having this dirasa is how we confirm our knowledge that we have with us today, especially in an age where printing is prevalent. As you all know, in the past, printing wasn't the norm. If you wanted a book, you took it to a scribe, and the scribe hand copied it off of the author's original, or something that was copied off of the author's original. And like this, the book circulated throughout the world. And that shows you the extent of the concern that the people had for knowledge. That books, these major compilations of the Sunnah, would come from one person, and individuals would hear it from him, memorize it, write it, then take it and travel with it to foreign lands and spread it, where it would be copied again and over. So a work like Bukhari, for example, Sahih al-Bukhari, that was authored by al-Bukhari, as he mentioned, for example, a large portion of it in Mecca, in the Rawd of the Prophet, in Medina, Bain al-Minbari wa Rawd. A book like this, where Bukhari is traveling the earth and people are listening to his hadith and he's teaching it, how it ends up in the Far East or the East, the Middle East, and ends up in Rome, this manuscript, right? And with all of its different versions. Anyway, the point of it is the science of hadith requires us to know about the books and the manuscripts. وأخذ متن من كتاب لعمل أو احتجاج حيث صاغ قد جعل أرضا له على أصول يشترط وقال يحيى النووي أصل فقط قلت لابن خير امتناع جزم بغير ما روى إجماع. Al-Iraqi rahimahullah ta'ala, he says in his Alfiya, and to take a text out of any book with the intent of acting according to it, or using it as an evidence where that is permissible, then Ibn Salah, he made a condition or prerequisite before doing that you compare it to multiple manuscripts. And Yahya an-Nawawi, he said, at least you must compare it to one manuscript. And Iraqi, he goes on to say, I said, as for قلت لابن خير, as far as Ibn al-Khayr, rahimahullah, Shaykh al-Hafiz Ibn al-Khayr, نعم, he says, قلت لابن خير الامتناع, Ibn al-Khayr, he prevented doing that, using it and this is important, listen to that statement, using it for yourself. I want to act by this hadith. Can I act by this hadith? He says, لا. قلت ولابن خير امتناع جزما بغير ما روى إجماع. Ibn Khair, he said, you cannot use it, let alone present it as an evidence. You can't act by it or present it as an evidence if you don't have your own chain to the book. The point of it all is that this shows us the importance of manuscripts. And anyway, we said that in all of this to say that this is something that the student can familiarize himself in any particular book. So we won't go into a long conversation about that, in spite of the fact that we went into a long conversation about the fact that we won't go into a long conversation about it. In any circumstance, to begin with, the last thing I'll say about the book in itself is that from the things that I particularly love about this book is the author's introduction. And I do think that the author's introduction is suitable to be singled out as its own work, qualifying it to be studied independently from the rest of the book. Meaning the introduction alone, before the author starts getting to the narrations and presenting the usul of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah based on their statements, the author's introduction itself is its own risala. It's its own treatise that a student should familiarize himself with, because it gives him the history of innovation and how it took hold amongst some of the Muslims and grew and spread until, unfortunately, the way that we've seen it in the past and the way that it could be seen at times today. So we'll start off with the author's introduction and, go from there. As far as the author's biography, we'll just read from a siyar, Siyar A'lam an-Nubala. And it's a very short biography, as we mentioned. Imam al-Dhahabi rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, al-Lalika'i, al-Imam al-Hafidh al-Mujawwad, al-Mufti, Abu al-Qasim, Hibatullah, ibn al-Hasan, ibn Mansur al-Tabari, al-Razi, al-Shafi'i, al-Lalika'i, Mufidu Baghdad, fi waqtihi. He says that al-Lalika'i was the Imam, the Hafidh, the scholar, the high scholar of Hadith, the Mujawwad, who was proficient in his transmissions. The Mufti, he had the role of being one who issued religious verdicts. His name was Abu al-Qasim, the father of Qasim, Hibatullah, ibn al-Hasan, the son of Hasan, ibn Mansur, the son of Mansur, al-Tabari, right? Al-Tabari from Tabaristan, al-Razi from Al-Ray, the area known as Al-Ray, and all of this is in modern day Iran, right? So he was from modern day Iran. And this is something that consistently brings us sadness. How that iqlim, how that area of the earth has changed from being a center, a markaz of knowledge in Islam and Hadith specifically, until what we see about it today. We ask Allah to return it back to the Sunnah. So the point is, he was from this area, Al-Ray. Al-Ray is close to what is modern day Tehran. He was Shafi'i in his madhab, in his religious discipline, his fiqh. He was Shafi'i. And this is something our teachers often bring our attention to. The fact that the early Shafi'iyya, although we see a lot of the Shafi'iyya today, a lot of them, their madhab has become joined with the aqidah of the Ash'ariyah. And we find often a lot of individuals from the Shafi'i madhab, from the later generations, you find them being Ash'ari. And, as is known, as we might talk about during this translation, the Ash'ari madhab went through its stages. And so Abu al-Hasan himself being Mu'tazili to begin with, and then abandoning i'tizal and becoming closer to a deviant group known as a Kullabiyya. And then he himself abandoning the Kullabiyya in the later portion of his life and returning back to the way of the Salaf, renouncing everything other than that which was the aqidah of the examples of people like Ahmed ibn Hanbal. But his followers, you find a lot of them, they stay, the early ones, the best of them, if you want to consider them in such a fashion. A lot of the earlier followers, they were still upon the way of the Kullabiyya. And then after that, you found them regressing. So even though the earlier generations like al-Baqillani and other than him, they were closer to Ahl Sunnah, being on the way of the Kullabiyya, you find after that they started to regress and revert back to being Mu'tazila, or close to the way of the Mu'tazila, as you find in the generations like al-Juwayni up until al-Ghazali, rahimahumullah ta'ala. And then even after that they regressed further until they ended up becoming what the innovation was originally intended to defend against. They became what the innovation that was produced by them and others was originally intended to defend against, and that was philosophers. Ilm al-kalam, al-falsafa. Right? You find the later of their scholars like al-Razi and other than them, rahimahumullah, being from those who fell into the field of philosophy. And so the point of it all is that because the author is going to talk about their intent in innovating, you find that the early Shafi'i scholars were against this. They were opposed this. And from the things that they mentioned about al-Lalika'i is that he was very severe against them, just like his teacher Abu Tahir as-Silafi, who used to purposely go out of his way to refute the Asha'ira, like al-Baqillani and other than them. And so this was his madhab, and as we see the earlier Shafi'i scholars, they were against the madhab of the Ash'ari. Naam. He was known as al-Lalika'i. This is like his affiliating him to his job, because he had his occupation was bay al-Lawlak, selling of shoes, basically, a shoe salesman. Well, Lawlak is a type of shoe, and so he was known as al-Lalika'i, the shoe salesman. He used to give benefit in Baghdad, and we talked about in other lessons how Baghdad was the capital at that time in the Muslim world. Dar es-Salam, the center of the Islamic world, and he was one who was teaching in this center. So that shows his prestige and his level, that he was able to succeed there. If he could make it there, he could make it anywhere, as the statement says, right? Mufid Baghdad fi waqti. He was the one who was known for benefiting the area of Baghdad during his time, and he was from the leaders in that area. He heard from Isa ibn Ali al-Wazir and Abu Tahir al-Mukhallas and Ja'far al-Fanaki al-Razi وأبو الحسن ابن الجندي وعلي ibn Muhammad al-Qassar and Ali ibn Muhammad and Aba Ahmed al-Faradi وعدة. He heard from these individuals, Isa the son of Ali al-Wazir and Abu Tahir al-Mukhallas and Ja'far al-Fanaki al-Razi and Abu al-Hasan ibn al-Jundi and Ali ibn Muhammad al-Qassar and Ali ibn Muhammad and Aba Ahmed al-Faradi, and a large portion besides them. And he gained his understanding of the religion and acts of worship and an aqidah, etc., from the Sheikh Abu Hamid. I'm sorry, not Abu Tahir al-Salafi. I said that earlier. Abu Hamid al-Salafi. Abu Tahir al-Salafi is someone else. He gained Abu Hamid al-Isfarayini. And he became, or he reached the levels of cleverness and excellence from his studentship under that individual. From the people that narrated upon him, from his students, and this is always important. You look at the kama ta'rifun, as you all know, in these statements you might have heard before, or perhaps you might haven't. Man khafi alayna bid'atu lam takhfa alayna ulfatu. Whoever his innovation is concealed from us, then his friendships aren't hidden from us. We always look at a person based upon their connections, and that's why it's important to keep good connections. Al-Jalis al-Salih, to have people that you're around and that you surround yourself with. You should always keep around you good individuals, because one of the ways that we determine the character of a person especially those that we don't know, is that we look at who are they around? Who did they learn from? Who learned from them? Who was around them? Who were their contemporaries and their friends? And like this, we see it's always important for us to look at any given author, what was his affiliations and relationships, who was his teachers, who were his students. So we see who his teachers was and their value and their importance. And then likewise, the students, because if the person is of good value, then the people of his time, the students of his time, you'll find them having this iqbal, this approach to him, and this traveling to him to benefit. The same way you might find us today traveling to visit the likes of Sheikh Fawzan or Sheikh Abdul Muhsin or other than them from our scholars in order to acquire a benefit and catch up to those who preceded us. So from his students are the likes of Abu Bakr al-Khatib. Abu Bakr al-Khatib, yani Abu Bakr Ahmed al-Khatib al-Baghdadi, right? The one who was famous, the Hafid of al-Mashriq, Abu Bakr al-Khatib al-Baghdadi. He says, likewise, al-Lalika'i's son, Muhammad ibn Hibatullah. He was from his students. Also, Abu Bakr Ahmed ibn Ali al-Turaythithi. And that's the individual who narrates this book. Also, Makki al-Karaji, al-Salar, and other than them. All right, these are all some of the people who were famous, who studied from him. He says, yani al-Dhahabi, in his book referring to al-Khatib al-Baghdadi, he says that al-Khatib, he said, kana yafhamu wa yahfaz. He used to understand very well. I mean, he had a good understanding and he used to memorize. وصنف كتابا كتبا في السنة أو كتابا في السنة. And ووصف كتابا في السنة. And al-Khatib, he described his book regarding the Sunnah, i.e. this book that is with us, the book in Aqidah. Al-Khatib, he says, وعاجلته المنية. And death hastened his time. He was, death beat him. It rushed him, meaning he died young. He went to an area, he left to go to an area known as Dainur, or Dainawar, and death caught, or his time caught up with him at that location in the month of Ramadan in the year 418. So he died young in the year 418. He says, Yani al-Khatib, حدثني علي بن الحسين بن حداء العكبري قال رأيت هبة الله الطبري في النوم فقلت ما فعل الله بك؟ قال غفر لي. قلت بماذا؟ فقال كلمة خافية في السنة أو بالسنة. He mentions on the authority of Ali ibn al-Husayn ibn Hida al-Ukbari, who said, I saw Hibatullah al-Tabari while sleeping, i.e. in a dream. And this is something that happens, as you all know, and you can read in various books. The arwah, while an individual is sleeping, they interact. They converse with each other and communicate. The souls of the sleep as well as the souls of the deceased. Allahu yatawaffa al-anfus hina mawtiha wallati lam tamut fi manamiha. Allah is the one who takes the souls at their time of death and those who haven't died at the time of sleep. And so the souls communicate and discuss. And so Al-Ukbari, he said, I saw Hibatullah al-Tabari while sleeping. And I said to him, what has Allah done to you? Yani, what kind of circumstance have you found yourself in with Allah? What has Allah done for you might be a nice way to translate it. He said, Hibatullah, in this dream of Al-Ukbari, he said, Allah has forgiven me. He says, and why has Allah forgiven you? What did you do that got you Allah's forgiveness? He said, kalimatun khafiyatun bis sunnah. A discreet statement regarding the sunnah, i.e. the correct aqidah. A discreet statement that I had maybe to someone or about someone regarding the sunnah, the correct aqidah. Al-Dhahabi, he goes on to say, قال الشجاع الذهلي لم يخرج عنه شيء من الحديث إلا اليسير قلت قد روى عنه أبو بكر التريثيثي كتابه في شرح السنة. Al-Dhahabi, he says, Shuja al-Dhuhli, he said, al-Lalika'i, he didn't transmit an abundance of hadith. He only transmitted a small amount of hadith during his time, meaning people who actually went to him to learn hadith itself. Al-Dhahabi says, but indeed, Abu Bakr al-Turaythithi, he transmitted from him his book explaining the Sunnah, explaining the Aqidah. And if he didn't have anything else, then inshallah this would have been sufficient for him. So this is the introduction to the biography of al-Lalika'i, or this is the introduction with the biography of al-Lalika'i rahimahullah. And inshallah, next lesson we'll pick up with the author's introduction of his book itself. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم وسبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.